Good morning, everyone, and we will go ahead and get started. So once again, welcome to our Wednesday webinar from PDS Vision. We are now beginning a new series of PLM modernization, and we're beginning this one with this first webinar of beginning the transition from PDM to PLM. So in this webinar, we're going to discuss more of some of the things that we need to do in our Windchill system to prepare for that transition from PDM to PLM, from basically being CAD-centric focus to part-centric. And I'll define those two as we're moving forward as well. So this is the beginning of this series. So the overall agenda is just simply doing an overview of myself and of course of PDS Vision. Then we're just gonna step back and do an overview of what PDM is in general terms, and then what PLM is in general terms, and then we'll do a demo inside of Windchill, and of course any questions that you may have asked during the presentation or once again at the end of the presentation. So real briefly, my name is Michael Wimberly. I have been with PDS Vision now for over 12 years. I've worked with PTC products now for over 30 years and been inside of the PTC channel for over 25 years. I'm also a certified trainer and implementer of Creo as well as Windchill. PDS Vision overall, we're a leading solutions provider and product design, systems, engineering, simulation, and product lifecycle management software and services. As you can see, we are a global company. We are actually PTC's largest global reseller. We are in 15 different countries. We have over 480 employees across the globe. So if you are a global company, we would definitely be a preferred reseller for you because we have people in multiple regions around the world. Some of our strong positionings and services, international coverage, as I just mentioned before, scale of PLM and system engineering engagements. So we have quite a few, as you can see down at the bottom. We have over 300 technical specialists. We have over 1,000 successful PLM implementations. And once again, we've done those in 15 different countries. Engineering expertise in simulation, functional safety, as well as risk and management practices. We also have our own suite of applications in the MyPDS apps. One of the core ones that we talk about is a MyPDS search, and we'll be talking about that as well through this process as far as being able to find data inside of the inside of your Windchill environment, even if you're not a everyday user of Windchill. And of course, we are a highly trusted and certified service provider for PTC and ANSYS. So as we begin working with companies and deal with the transition from the physical into digital, there's some challenges that occur. Of course, products, what we want to do with our different products that we deal with customers, we want to go in and make those products smarter. So not just from a design intent, but from the information we can gather from it, from the different analysis that we can do. We want to connect them using IoT. We want to go ahead and make sure that we have all of the fulfillment for all the regulations. So whatever the regulations are for your industry, more than likely there is some system inside of Windchill that will help you manage that appropriately. And then of course, build a digital twin. You have your actual physical, but we also want to go through and create the digital so that we see all that information live from your physical into the digital, reading all the different instruments and whatever it may be, doing all the testing that's necessary to go in and make sure that things work the way they're supposed to. For production, we always want to go through and decrease manufacturing downtime. So being able to predict when things are going to go in and basically fall apart or just basically come to the end of life, when to replace them. Once again, predict failures. Aging workforce, that's actually something that is very important because a lot of our senior engineers, whether we're talking engineering or manufacturing, they have a lot of knowledge that they've developed over, or I should say that they've gained over their entire career. And as they're retiring, some of, if not a lot of that data is retiring with them. What we want to be able to do is capture that inside of the different processes that we may have inside of Windchill. And then, of course, optimize the production through AI. AI is not the future, it is the now. So being able to go through and incorporate that as well. One of the most important things when process is removing data silos. A lot of companies have engineering data, they have manufacturing data, they have marketing data, they have all these things, but none of them talk to each other. Or you've given manufacturing something, something's changed in engineering, and they're working to an old print. So what we want to be able to do is remove those data silos and have everybody looking at the same data at the same time, live. So when something changes, the notification goes out that things have been updated. Smart connected systems. So once again, we're not just looking at service techs doing one thing and having one system, ERP being a whole different system, engineering having a third system. We want to make sure that all these things can talk to each other. And then, of course, service and operations, we want to go through and control those things as well. Reduce non-value IT costs in our infrastructure. A lot of things are moving to the cloud as well as SaaS, software as a service. So those options are available as well for Windchill. So you can actually create a cloud environment, so you don't actually have the hardware in your building. It is actually on the cloud. And of course, big data. You know, you have a lot of data. You have a lot of, of your IP that you want to go through and maintain. You want to go through and secure. That's what we want to make sure we're doing inside the Windchill environment. You want to create value out of the data, such as the AI, the data links, the analysis that you go through and run. Once again, we're all looking at the same data. So we're once again going back to that process and removing the data silos so that when we are going in and we're doing the analysis, it is on the latest and greatest because we pulled it right from Windchill. Data and cybersecurity, very secure system. But once again, inside of Windchill, there is a lot of security things that can be set up as well, so that the right people have the right access to the right data at the right time. And then, of course, create new business models. As we are transitioning from a lot of the physical stuff to the digital world, some of our processes are going to change. So we need to go through and adapt those so we can go in and adapt newer business models that streamline our processes. Now, once again, the digital thread, the transformation of the physical, we have engineering excellence, customer operations, supply chain, manufacturing efficiency, and of course, service optimization. All those things are very important. Excuse me. That is why the different pieces of the Windchill environment are important as well. I apologize. So you have the CAD, which defines the digital. You also have the ALM, which is documents. You have the risk and reliability simulation, SLM for service, PLM, which we're going to talk about, IoT, as well as augmented reality. All those different things come together to once again make sure that everything is communicating real time with everyone at the same time. So it's very important to make sure that as we're going through, we are going in and transitioning once again from physical thinking into digital thinking, how we can tie all those different pieces together. Now, real quickly, just a quick summary. PDM system. Well, the PDM system is simply product data management. It's a use of software to help organize and communicate product information across globally distributed teams where multiple product development tools may be used. Once again, the core part of PDM is just product data management. We're looking at our CAD files. We're looking at anything, as you can see here, anything mechanical, electrical, or even software that we can go through and actually store inside of the system. But the core function is storing our actual product data and maintaining it. With those, we have the functionality of data storage with the history. So a lot of times that's important. We want to make sure that we actually have the history of the files that we're going in and maintaining. So as we're going in and checking in the file, it's not overriding, it's creating a newer version. It also goes through and makes sure that you don't have duplicate names. So those that are working outside of a PDM environment, a lot of times you have a copy of a file here, you have that the same file copy in another folder, same number, but which one is the latest and greatest? The PDM systems allow you to go in and avoid having those duplicate file names. Relate and associative data remains connected even if it's renamed or moved. So by having that core PDM environment, it knows where files are. So inside of Windchill, if I rename a file, I don't have to worry about it losing its connection to the files that it was associated with. The system understands all I did was change the name, but it's still tied to that file. Or if I move it somewhere, I still have access to that. Revision control, once again, making sure that we maintain the revision history of files. So not just the iteration history as far as a change, a simple change, but an actual revision from like an A to a B, maintaining all those types of revisions as well. Then we can also go through and maintain states. So as we are going through the life of a product, we can go through and actually transition through the life cycles of that particular model to make sure that it is actually being maintained as well. Promotions is the way we go through and make those changes. We can also go in and use our publishing tools, which gives those lightweight viewables that we can go through and use. Creo View is the free viewer that comes with Windchill that you can go through and use as well when you're actually going to publish those. And of course, Windchill, of course, is a multi-CAD environment. So yes, Creo is the PTC core software, but PDM, or Windchill, I should say, actually does go through and manage other CAD files. So whether it's SolidWorks, CATIA, Inventor, whatever it may be, it can go through and manage those through workgroup managers. All right, then we go into a PLM. So with PLM, the shift now goes from just being engineering focused to company-wide focus. So with PTC Windchill, the brand name for PTC's complete product suite of product lifecycle management, the vision is to provide an end-to-end information solution for all product related to data and processing. So now we're looking at all divisions of the company, once again, being able to access the same data at the same time. So this is where we once again want to now break down those silos that says this person has just this data, this person just has this data. Now we're saying here's all the data, and now we can give people the appropriate access to the data when they need access to that data. So now that's where Windchill as a PLM environment comes in to play. So this is what we have now, all the different areas and all the different systems that can be touched by Windchill. And we'll cover some of these in a little bit more detail as to how to expand into those different areas. But the core focus right now is going in and building from our PDM mindset into a PLM mindset, and then once again gathering other information from other systems, whether we're talking Creo, we're talking MathCAD, Arbortext, or once again maybe some other third-party software that we're integrating with inside of Windchill. So once again, same general information that we're looking at before. Revision control, no duplicate file names, associations are still the same. States, we really want to get into those as we're moving forward because that helps to control permissions. So if you're not going in and using your lifecycle states currently, that is something that we want to make sure that we begin to use going forward. And if you have just a basic lifecycle, you may want to also look at going in and updating that by reviewing what your overall process is, because once again, we're looking at the life cycle of a product, not just the management of the data. So who touches this product through its life? And should that be accounted for in its actual life cycle? So if we're going from design into prototyping, into analysis, into manufacturing, are those states that we want to go through and put in there so that the manufacturing people get notified that, hey, this is something for you to review. and anybody that looks at the file can see that it's at a manufacturing review state and know that that's where it is in this process. So they know who to contact to see where it is moving forward. Other part that we want to go through and incorporate is, of course, change management. So everybody has some type of change management process, whether it's formal or informal. Windchill has the change management environment set up. We're talking from a problem report to a change request to a change notice to the individual tasks that are assigned in that change notice. So you can do that for even an initial release of a product or for an actual change of that product. And as you're going in and moving forward, and we'll talk about the part-centric piece of it in just a moment, the other thing that we can go through and define is product disposition. So when we're going in and we're changing, let's say we're revising a file from revision A to revision B, now we're going to go through and take everything that was revision A and scrap it, or we can go through and retrofit it, or whatever we want to go in and do for those particular items. So as we're going through that change process, we can specify for everything that is existing, do this with them. We can also go through and define effectivity. So yes, we're going through and we're going to have revision B, but revision B is not going to be active in our system until the 1st of June. So it's there, but for the effectivity piece of it, we're still going to use A all the way up until the 1st of June. At the 1st of June, we're now going to shift to B. So I kind of use the example of like the Apple iPhone or the Galaxies or whatever it is. When we get those phones, when they release those phones, they've been done for a while. They just haven't been in production yet. So they finished them 6 months ago, but we don't see them until the 1st of June. That's when they release it. So that's kind of what we're doing here is, yes, this is done. We're happy with it, but we're not ready for it until this particular day. One of the things that we're going to focus on in these series of webinars is our bill of materials, because we want to go through and look at how to transition, once again, PLM to PLM, from looking at it from a CAD-centric bill of material to a part-centric bill of material, which means instead of it just being driven by the CAD and how it's put together, we also want to go through and now look at it being part-centric and now adding things that aren't necessarily directly CAD, or some things in processes that we can go through and add, such as replacement parts. You know, we can go through and now assign approved vendors for a particular part. So what other type of attributes can we build into these parts? When I say parts, I'm referring to WT parts. And once again, I'll talk about that in just a moment. But what other information can we build into that to effectively build into a PLM system? So these are things that may be associated with an ERP that we normally wouldn't do in a CAD. But now that we're shifting to PLM, why can't we add it into our Windchill system and then just export it out of Windchill and import it into our ERP system? So that's something we can look at as well. And then we'll also talk about some BOM transformations. Right now we're focusing on an E-BOM, which is your engineering BOM, but we can also go through, or we'll also talk about M-BOMs, which are manufacturing BOMs, as well as S-BOMs, which is service BOMs. So we'll talk about those as well. And as I just mentioned, with those different bill of materials, we can now go through and export out of Windchill and import into our specific ERP systems in whatever format it requires us to do. And then the last part of that is, of course, we want to go through and use our publishing tools. So we want to go through and make sure that we do go in and set up our publishers. So we do have those lightweight viewables that we can go through and use. All right, so from here, some of the important things that we're going to talk about or view in just a moment inside of Windchill is setting up that transition. The first thing that we need to do, or you need to do in your Windchill environment, is turn on the creation of WT parts. WT parts is an integral piece of the Windchill environment. So those things what I just talked about, dispositions, replacement files, even going in and creating uh, M-bombs and S-bombs, all that stuff is done by manipulating WT parts. So when you're in the Windchill environment, when you hear part-centric, what they're referring to is a WT part, not a CAD part. CAD files inside of Windchill are generalized as CAD documents or CAD files, or you can say a CAD part, CAD assembly. But if you hear the terminology of just part-centric, what they're referring to is using WT parts as a focal piece versus the CAD as a focal piece. Now, in the creation of WT parts, there are multiple ways of going in and doing that. One of them is during the check-in process. So when you're going in and doing your check-in, if you go to the second page, there is an option to go in that says auto associate. What it does, it goes into Windchill. It says it goes and tries to find a WT part with the same name as your CAD file. If it finds it, of course, they link up. Even if it's already created, it just goes in and, of course, updates. But if it does not find it, it will then create that WT part upon check-in of that CAD file. Now, that's done. That can be done with just the base license. But that's the only thing you can do with WT parts in a base license is go in and create them during the check-in. With a base license of Windchill, you cannot go into your workspace or go into Windchill and simply say create part. Once again, being WT part. That functionality is not available inside of the base license. So all the additional manipulations, the M-bombs, the S-bombs, all the restructuring, all that stuff, or creating replacement files and all those different things, that stuff is not available in just the base license. So when you're going to transition from PDM to PLM, you want to look at upgrading your licensing as well to one of the advanced licenses. Now, with the advanced licenses, this is beneficial as well because you do have different Windchill environments that have CAD files but have no WT part files because they weren't created during check-in. So one of the ways that you can go through and do that is through an auto associate. So what you're able to do is now bring those files out. You can actually create the WT parts. Go in and add the CAD files to your workspace, go into auto associate inside of that workspace and have it go in and create the WT parts for the files inside of your workspace. So you can do it by products. You can do it as you go through and manipulate. But that's another methodology of going in and creating them. And then, of course, you check them in from your workspace. And then, of course, you can go in and create them individually. As I said, you can't do this with a base license, but I can go in and just simply say new part and now go through and define a part. Now, we'll get into it in just a moment inside of the demo, but you can also go through and create what are called soft part types. So just like with CAD, you have a CAD file, you have a sheet metal part, you have a metric sheet metal part, you have an English sheet metal part. You can go through and customize the different types of parts that you have depending upon the categories that you want to go through and define. So we'll look at that as well. Now, some of the things that we also want to keep in mind as we start to work and incorporate WT parts. One of the first things we want to do is make sure our configurations are set. We want to go through and define our object initialization rules. What that simply means is we're going to assign a life cycle to that WT part. We're going to make sure the revision is set to that WT part. We want to go through and define what that default folder is going to be for your WT parts, as well as define the numbering. So auto numbering is fine, but with your life cycles and revisions, most of that is simply the same that we're using for the CAD files. So we just want to make sure we duplicate that for the WT parts. Now, for the default folder, I have seen companies that actually have a separate folder that the WT parts go in so that the CAD files are in one location and the WT parts are in a different location, but once again, they're still linked to each other. They're just in different folders. Which now brings us to the next piece of it, is we also want to go through and make sure we update our preferences. There are 3 core areas that we want to go through and update in preferences: manage collections, operations, as well as part management. One of the things that we want to go through, and I just mentioned it above, is the auto associate. Turn that on. So when you're checking in, it goes in and does that check that says, hey, here is part XYZ. Is there a WT part named XYZ? If it is, connect them. If not, create it. Same thing with checkout, revise, save as we're going in and doing our checkouts and we're doing our revise and we're doing our save as or any of those options, we want to also go through and make sure that we're collecting the WT parts. So inside of those different things, when we do a revise, we want to automatically not just collect the CAD file, but we also want to automatically collect the associated WT part. So now we make sure that those things stay in sync with each other. So I don't want to revise the CAD and leave the WT part behind, and now I have a CAD file that does not have a newer version of the WT part. So we want to make sure that we update those preferences as well. And then we also want to go through and add any additional parameters or attributes. It's the same parameters / attributes that we have in our CAD files are the same ones that we want to add to our WT part files. So it basically propagates that information from the CAD into the WT part. And then if there are specific things that we want in our WT part file, like plant location, machine location, whatever it is that is not necessary engineering data, but maybe valuable information, we can assign that just to the WT part file and not have that information inside of the CAD file. So we can go through and add that information. And then the last thing is the most important, go into your policy administration and set the permissions as well. You want to make sure that you have the permissions to go in and create the WT parts. You want to have the permissions to go through and manipulate the WT parts when you need to at the appropriate states. Once again, a lot of times you can just go through and duplicate some of the permissions that you have for your CAD, but there are some things that are specific for WT parts as well. But you want to make sure you update all that information. And then one of the other things that kind of helps with that as well is the indexing server. This is a whole nother server, but this actually expands your searchability. So when you go through and you add your parameters / attributes inside of Windchill, all those things are now searchable fields. So if I want to go in and find out in this particular product, what was made out of, 6160 or stainless or wood or whatever, I can go through and now search by material and now go in and find everything that fits my criteria. But the indexing search will take it one step further for not just CAD, but for even documents that will allow you to go through and search for like words that are actually in a document. So not just the title of the document, but if in the document you have my name, it'll go through and search every document in the system, or once again in the product that you define that actually has my name inside of the actual text. So that's something else you want to look at as well. Just going in and setting up an index server. And as I mentioned, one of the things that we want to simply go in and do is we want to come from looking at just, the bill of material that we have on a drawing to actually having a full expandable part bill of material that shows alternates, that goes in and shows different variations, that goes through and shows the associated CAD, associated documents, all that information as we go forward. So I'll jump in real quickly into Windchill. And with that, once again, here's our environment. So as I mentioned before, when we go into our search, And right now I am in the advanced search. For those that don't necessarily use the advanced search and you just use the search up here, that's fine. But inside of here, you have, what am I searching for? I'm searching for my favorite items, and I can search for CAD. I can go through and search through WT parts. I'm just going to go in and search for CAD. Now, underneath here are all of the attributes that are available for me to search for. Now, some of those are just Windchill attributes, but some of those can be actual CAD specific or part specific attributes that you can go through and search for as well. So any attributes that you have are now searchable inside of here. Once again, based on the information that you're going in and using. So that's why that's important when we go through and actually find or use any of the data. Now, as we're going through and we're looking at, our different areas, as I said, you can see this is an expansive area. So there's a lot of folders in here that helps us organize stuff. We'll get to that point. But you can see just by some of the titles, okay, we're looking in the design folder. Underneath there, we have bill of material information. If I expand that, there's some additional information inside of here, CAD data, ECAD data, design review. So you can see there's a lot of information that we're going in and storing inside of Windchill. And once again, as you can see, a lot of this isn't just engineering data. It is data that can be used by other people inside of the company. But as we're going in and we're looking at, our CAD data, there we have it. As I go through and I look at the different files, there's the little thumbnail viewers. Once again, just for those that aren't familiar with some of this functionality as well, here we have the thumbnails and that little pop-up area. If you noticed in this pop-up area, it's showing the assembly itself or the part itself. And it is actually a live thumbnail, so I can go through and spin it around. But over here on the right side, it not only shows where it's used, but it also shows what's used inside of this. So this is the assembly, and this shows all of the parts that are inside of that assembly. If I wanted to send any of those, I could just go in and select on it, and now that becomes my viewer. If I want to go back, just hit the back, it goes back to there. If I want to go back to see, okay, this is used in this assembly. So what is this assembly? When I select on that, it now shows this assembly, all of its sub-assemblies, and where it's used. So I can continue to go through that, or very easily, I can just go to the information window. And inside of here, I'm in the related objects tab. So it's showing there is that support. And as I go through and expand, I can see the hierarchy of where this thing is being used, all the way to the top level assembly. So that's one of those things that are beneficial when we go from just thinking of PDM to PLM, is that, yeah, we have an engineering change that we need to make on a file. Okay, where is it used? So if I change this, these are all of the assemblies that are going to be affected by that. So I can then go through and show that. Now, with this, inside of this assembly, there's your general structure. So you can see, very simple, it's assembly with all of the different parts underneath it. And this is our CAD BOM. So we're still looking at the actual CAD information for this particular file. You can even see inside of here, just keep in mind some of the menus that are here, that the structure is a little bit different. Now, if I go to, once again, the related objects, there is its WT part. When I select on that, you can see I get a whole bunch more tabs because there's a lot more information that I can do with that. I can still go into the structure. I can still see the structure. When I'm with my related objects, I can now go through and associate documents, and we're going to go through and talk about all this stuff. I can associate documents. So now that I'm not just looking at the WT part file, I'm looking at all the things that affect whatever that product is that I'm looking at or that I'm working on. I mentioned before, approved vendor lists, approved manufacturing lists, all this stuff we're definitely going to get into a little bit more. I just want to kind of give you an overview of what it is that we'll be working on. Now, as we move forward, remember that list of information that I told you we need to go through an update. So my recommendation is when you're going in and you're beginning to set up your preferences, when you're updating the preferences that you're using, I would recommend doing it at the organization level. That way, whomever's controlling those only needs to be an organization administrator, not a site administrator. Site administration is mainly for like some of our IT people, or if you're managing licensing. Other than that, from a user standpoint, you can do everything that you need to do from the organization level. Now, under the organization level, I would go into utilities. And then under utilities, and once again, I'm just showing you what some of these things are. I'll go into the preference manager. As I mentioned before, you have associativity that's here. You also have operations. There's your auto associate. There's your check-in operations. So all these things, auto associate upon check-in, we will go through and select that and change that to yes. Which means every time we check in, that box is already checked for us. So now it begins to build up our WT parts in the background. So we don't have to go through and do the auto associate for each one of those. We just build them up as we're checking in the assemblies. But once again, if you want to go full into Windchill, then you can go through and now add the items to your workspace and begin to do an auto associate inside of there to create that information. So this is where we will go through and start with some of the preferences. As I mentioned before, other areas that we want to go through and look at is type and attribute management. Now, we have top levels. I talked about soft object types. So when we come down here and we look for our different documents, if you're not familiar, a CAD file inside of Windchill is actually referred to as an EPM document. That is the parent of a CAD document. When I expand, then I see CAD document. So if I want, once again, from top down, if I want to go through and create attributes that are not just in the CAD document, as well as dynamic documents or whatever other CAD documents we create, I can add them at EPM. If I want them specific to CAD, then I would go into that specific object type. When I select it, it goes through and shows the different attributes that are here. And then if I need a new one, I would just simply come over here and create a new attribute. Now, when we're going in and synchronizing, one of the things that is key is inside of your Creo environment, you want to go in and make sure that that file has that same attribute designated. So this is an actual parameter we created, or an attribute that we created, because it's capitalized. So any ones that we create, we will go to capitalize. But once again, we're going into the CAD files, and I'm just showing you a general CAD file right now. When we go into our parameters, excuse me, we want to make sure that we have the designate parameter column checked. Now, here's also a little tidbit for that. If that is something that you currently do not have, you can use model check to go through and set that. So you can do it individually on a file, or you can do a batch model check and actually have it go through and now set that. So it can check to validate that a parameter or these set of parameters are designated. If they're not, it can go in and actually designate those, and then of course you just check those files back in. So if you do have parameters, and if you're not, syncing those things up currently, then you may not have any parameters that are designated. So you want to go through and make sure the parameters are designated so that they're then being able to be read by Windchill. And then that's where those values will synchronize when we're actually going in and looking at our information pages for the different files. So once again, CAD documents. And as I said before, you also want to go through and set those for parts. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, there is part. And as you can see, underneath part, there are multiple soft types, or you can just call them subparts underneath there that are very specific. There's electrical, information, there's placeholders. They have a parts for raw material. You have sourcing, so all these different ones that are here, and they can have subparts as well. I don't know if any of these do. This one does. So information based, so it's content or division. So you can continue to go through and build those, and as you go through and create your WT part, you're able to go through and specify which object type of a WT part you want to go through and use. As I said, I'm giving you an overview now, but starting in the next series, we're really going to actually start to do the application. But what I'm showing you right now is the information that you need to get started before we go through and start to dig into the full creation of parts and part structures and things like this. This is basically the before work that we need to go through and set up. So that's here. We also can come over here if you don't have them, attributes. So this is where we will go through and now specify the different attribute types that we wanted to go through and use. So if it's for a specific, company, if it's for a specific product, a project, those things we can go through and basically create a folder, and then underneath that specific folder, we can go through and now add additional information. So each one of these is an actual attribute / parameter that we've gone through and selected. So once again, this is more on the administrative side. So if you have questions as you're going in and developing these things, definitely reach out, because we want to make sure that as you begin this process to migrate from PDM to PLM, we are going in and setting up things appropriately. Going through here, once again, I mentioned life cycles. We can go through and set up our life cycle templates, whatever they need to be. For those that aren't familiar with at least how they look, we can go through and simply, that's all it is. So when you're looking at a life cycle inside of Windchill, this is where it's developed. And we go through and we define what that transition is going to be from this to there. So that determines how we get from in work to released by going and defining the information here. With that as well, we would then go through and gather all of that information and create an object initialization rule. Now I'll go through and do one for, there's my CAD document. I'm going to go ahead and just download that, save it, keep it, open the file. Once again, this is just the initial setup, but we're now going in to define, as I mentioned before, what that default folder is going to be. For every time you create a WT part, is there going to be a subfolder for it, or is it going to be just at the top level? What life cycle are we going to go through and use? If we want to use team templates, we can do that. Once again, there's a numbering scheme. Are we doing auto numbering? Are we doing, putting a prefix in front of it? Revisioning. What is our revision series going to be? Remember, we can go through and do it, letters, numbers. We can do a combination of the both. We can go through and set it up where it transitions from numbers to letters as it transitions from in work to production. So all those different things we can set up. But this file here, your object initialization rule, the OIR, is where now you point to everything that you set up. I want to use that specific life cycle that I set up. I want to go through and use for this object type that I set up, for the folders that I've defined inside of the environment. All of those different things, I'm going to now go through and define inside of my OIR. So all of those things are necessary for you to go through and actually set up the proper transition to make sure there's nothing being lost in between the transition from PDM to PLM. Any questions on anything that I've covered up to this point? If so, please add it to the chat. I meant to mention that before, but if you do have any questions, please ask your questions in the chat that you may have for this information that we're covering. So with that, I do want to come back to this slide here because this is once again the important slide. As we go through and we begin that transition, we want to make sure that we are creating our WT parts through one of these methods. Like I said, if you're doing it gradually, then at least turn on the auto associate in your preferences so that as you're checking it in, it's creating those WT parts. Now, also with your WT parts, if you don't want to look at them all the time, you can go through and actually put them in another folder, or just inside of that table display, just look at CAD files or filter out the WT part files. Any of those things can be done. But if you're looking to do the additional stuff, once again, that we're going to begin to work on in the next session, then we want to go through and update the licensing to one of the advanced license files. If you're not sure which one you need, once again, reach out. We can help you to configure the appropriate one. PTC has gone through and restructured some of the Windchill licensing to be more specific. But keep in mind that with your Windchill license, I should say with the Windchill environment, PTC has been completely focused on PLM. Because when you buy a base license of Windchill, it does not come with CAD. It comes with basically data management. So if you want a CAD, then you can go through and use the Creo add-on. You can use the SolidWorks add-on. You can use the CATIA add-on. You can use the Inventor add-on. So any of those can be added into the Windchill environment, but your base Windchill license is a Windchill focused license. Everything else is an add-on. But once again, as you're looking to move forward, definitely reach out. We can help you to figure out which license works best for you. And as I just mentioned, you want to go through and set up your configurations, life cycles, revisions, default folders, numbering schemes, all those things you want to go through and set up. And as I said, definitely go through and make sure that some of these preferences are set up so that your WT parts don't get lost. Because we're still using CAD for our core data. So as we're revising and as we're checking in and checking out, we want our WT parts to follow that. So when we go from A.1 to A.2, we want our WT part to go from A.1 to A.2. So we want those things to stay synced with each other. When we revise from A to B, we want that WT part to be listed in there as well. So we don't have to think about it. It's an automatic thing that's being done. Same thing as I mentioned with the auto associate. If you don't have to think about it and just let it do it in the background, it's one less thing that you have to worry about. And then once again, adding the parameters. And as I said, we will build on all of this as we move forward to go in and add part-specific attributes that are not necessarily inside of our CAD environment. And then, of course, permissions. We want to go into our policy administrator and make sure that we go through and set permissions on WT parts for all the states that are associated with this life cycle. And as I mentioned, you can do the index server. It's not necessarily a requirement. It's just something that's beneficial. As I mentioned before, you do want to go through and make sure you have your publisher though, because your publisher is huge when you start dealing with people outside of engineering that need to go through and view engineering data. So at this point, once again, with PDS Vision, we can be your preferred advisor for your digital transformation journey, the company to work for and with. And once again, why us? Because we have a long-term relationship with our customers and PTC. As I mentioned before, we have a global presence, deep knowledge of the technology and industry, of course, financially stable, management consulting, winning culture, offshore capabilities, and we, of course, have highly skilled employees. So we would love to work with you. If you have any questions or anything that you want to go through and ask questions about or get more information on, please feel free to reach out to me. Once again, email address is michael.wimberly@pdsvision.com. You can also go through and call me. Once again, my phone number, I'm in Indianapolis, but my phone number is 765-278-0372. And of course, for our next set of webinars or just to get information on PDS Vision as a whole, please visit our website at pdsvision.com. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks. So these are every other week webinars for this series. So please stay tuned, look for the information coming to you. So once again, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.